All right. Thanks, Patrick, for that great introduction. It's so great to be back in Edmonton. I usually come back to visit family, and so it's been nice to come back to visit the science family this time around. And I have a few of my students in the background, and so you'll see their faces come up on the slides as well, and you can turn back and just see who's who as we go along, so you can direct questions to them afterwards as well. Because we have such a diverse audience and because we do such interdisciplinary research, I am trying to give a little bit of background on both the neuro and rehab aspects of our work as well as the machine learning areas. So bear with me if it is something that you know very well. Hopefully there's something else that you're learning about today. And I'm also just going to talk about kind of one large area of research in our lab. We do some other areas of research, so there's some students here that aren't here today, but we do a lot more in some of the implanted devices and basic science realm with rehab and spinal cord as well. But I really wanted to show off some of our really cool reinforcement and other types of machine learning work and how we apply them to walking. Our lab is called the NERVS Lab, and we are at the Craig Nielsen Rehab Hospital at the University of Utah. NERVS stands for Neural Engineering and Rehabilitation via Electrical Stimulation. I'm very proud of that acronym, and we have an awesome group that helps with our branding as well. Our lab has, in the rehab hospital, is a full-on gait lab, so that means that we can record pretty much any aspect of walking that we want. So we have overhead support if people need assistance offloading some of their body weight and catching them if they fall. We have force plates on the ground. We have a split belt treadmill. We have different types of assessments of more complex walking, like uneven surfaces or narrowing beams. And then what they're doing in the chair there is doing some reflex recordings. So again, kind of hitting on our assessments of walking and different parts of the nervous system that contribute to walking and muscle activation. So we can do it all there. We do have an animal lab area as well. So actually if you go into my CV, most of my research is actually animal work. And I did that through all my PhD and all my postdocs, and it was my last postdoc that we got into human subjects research. And right now that's been the dominant part of our work and what I'll be talking to you about today. I just kind of wanted to highlight our mission of our lab and what drives our research and just kind of use that to frame what we're going to talk about today. So with our lab in the rehab hospital, and a big reason why I like those clinical appointments is because we try to improve the quality of life of people who have neurological impairments, especially motor function, and we try to use state-of-the-art neurotechnologies and rehab assistive devices to accomplish that. In addition to doing that kind of tech work, we're looking at that foundational understanding of motor and sensory systems so that we can better inform these rehab solutions and technologies that we're looking to develop or innovate. And our lab is focusing on both developing and testing new technologies and really trying to take things into new areas. And so we do that through both clinical and preclinical models and really just trying to hit that whole translation spectrum from that early foundational work, early implementation, and then towards deployment into the people who ultimately we seek to help with all of this work that we're doing. So I want to talk a little bit about walking because, everybody walked into this room here today, and it's something that we often just don't think about. We learn when we're little, and I think it's something that we often take for granted, and it's actually a surprisingly complex task. I think we have people who work in upper limbs here, and I think you can very much appreciate the complexity of the fine motor control of our upper limbs, but our lower limbs, it's not just simply a rhythmic, your legs move and you're fine, right? We have errors all the time, and there's actually a lot of very complex circuitry in the nervous system that contributes to walking and informs walking. And my favorite part of this system is the spinal cord. And the spinal cord itself has a very critical role in walking. And it has this circuit that I'm not going to go super into detail with, but it's called a central pattern generator. I will say it's up for debate if it's in humans. I don't understand why it's debated. I think it exists there. We're going to maybe make some people angry on YouTube later, but that's okay. But we have these circuits in the spinal cord that can generate these walking movements, and they will activate our motor neurons, which go to our leg muscles to produce these movements. They get inputs from our sensory receptors from our limbs, and then they also get inputs from our brain and brainstem and other areas coming down. And so it has all these inputs, but ultimately there's a lot of circuitry in the spinal cord there. And so this is circuitry that we can tap into, as we'll see in a moment. I also just wanted to do a little quick overview of some types of neurological injury and some of the populations that we're looking to help with our research. So one is spinal cord injury, and so this is where you actually have damage to the spinal cord, and the result is going to be motor, sensory, as well as autonomic deficits. So that means bladder, bowel, sexual function, as well as blood pressure regulation, a whole gamut of things that can happen, because that spinal cord is really important for communicating anything from our upper level in our brain and brainstem down to our limbs and our extremities. The severity depends a bit on the location as well as the amount of damage to the spinal cord. So kind of as you go down, you'll have the upper to lower limbs affected. So you have that kind of distribution as the nerve roots come off of that spinal cord there. And then another one that I just wanted to bring up a little bit is stroke. So this is affects a lot of people. I think one stat I saw from World Health Organization is like 1 in 4 people will experience a stroke in their lifetime. And I'm sure everyone in this room has known someone who's experienced that. There's kind of 2 main types. So one is the blockage of blood vessels, that's ischemic, so kind of similar to a heart attack, but in the brain is kind of how it was described to me when I was younger. And then the other one is a weakened blood vessel that ruptures and causes a hemorrhage, so that's a brain bleed. Those ones are usually more catastrophic because red blood cells and iron like to poke holes in neural tissue, unfortunately. So those are kind of the 2 main types of stroke. I'm sure there's lots of subtypes that we won't go into today. But as a result, you get motor function, sensory function loss, as well as cognitive and behavioral deficits, just because there's so much that goes on in that brain that can potentially get damaged from that stroke. And then the deficit that people experience depends again on the location of where that damage occurred, how much neural tissue was damaged, and also that cause of damage and kind of how that affects the neural tissue that is impacted by that stroke. And in terms of walking, it's rated very important with people with paralysis. There's a paper that says that they're ranking it first or second by a majority of people with paraplegia or lower limb paralysis. When you get to tetraplegia that affects the upper limbs, they would prioritize hand use because that's just, it's much harder to get around without hands than it is with legs. But it is something that's very important, and it's a big focus of rehab. There's a lot of other important areas, but this is the one that we're focusing on here today. And then I just wanted to quickly give an overview of the typical rehab, just so that when we get into all the fun, cool technologies that we're doing, you can kind of know what people would have just as part of their normal care. So when they're doing rehabilitation of walking, I mean, there's a few different ways that they do that in the rehab hospital and in clinics. So there's a couple here that I have. So one is parallel bars. This is maybe with a less severe or kind of towards later in rehab. They can support their upper body on those parallel bars, and then they're getting assistance with those movements of the leg. This is an overground task. It relies a lot on having that upper body strength. Whereas in the middle there, that is body weight supported treadmill training. This is, you can actually have a harness and that support of the body weight, so that if you can't make that weight on your upper limbs, you can do that instead. But it's really physical therapist intensive, so there's usually one person on each leg and possibly 1 or 2 people behind them, maybe another one in the room to help run the treadmill. It's very laborious. The physical therapists are there seated, leaning over, moving that leg for that person. So this is very onerous on everyone, and it's very resource intensive as well. And then another one that's, when they're ready to do more overground, you can also put them in a harness and do a little bit of body weight offloading, or it helps them catch if they fall or stumble, and they can do overground tracks. So most rehab hospitals will kind of have an overhead track that goes around all the gym equipment in there. And so that's kind of a lot of what you would see. Sometimes, like once they're ready, they might do a little bit of the overground track with some stairs or a ramp in the middle, but it is focused a lot more on that even ground, which is something that I will bring up later. In terms of supplementing rehab, there's a lot of research that has looked at trying to boost the effects of rehab and have people have better outcomes. And one that's been around for a really long time is electrical stimulation, and people just apply it in all sorts of different places. So one of the earlier ones is functional electrical stimulation. It goes also by many other names, but you can have electrodes that are placed on the surface of the skin over the muscle bellies. There's also variations of doing implanted nerve stimulation, needle stimulation, less so in PT. But the device here that I have is the Parastep, which is one of the, I think like the first FDA approved functional electrical stimulation assistive device. I don't think it's around anymore. No, it's not around anymore. And what it had is it has push buttons on the walker so that they could push a button and then their leg would move. And then they'd push the other button and then their other leg would move. And so they're really just remote controlling their own legs. Functional electrical stimulation, it succumbs to fatigue quite quickly, and this is a big reason for its failed adoption, along with a bunch of just logistics with wires and things like that. But it's something that can help keep muscle bulk and keep people upright, which has a lot of benefits with their bones and their blood pressure and things like that. A lot of people who have any implanted systems, they pretty much just use them for exercise now, or to do maybe a stand assist to reach something, and then they'll go back in their chair. And so that's kind of where this has left off, but there's a lot of research in just understanding more about how it works and how muscles react to it. But one that I want to focus on a little bit more today is spinal cord stimulation, and this is why I brought up the spinal cord at the beginning. When there's a spinal cord injury that is above the area that leads to the leg muscles, so the motor neurons of the leg muscles is the lumbosacral enlargement. If you have a lesion above that, those motor neurons are still alive and they can still talk to those muscles. They're just not getting the descending voluntary commands from the brain or input from the brainstem to be able to make any use of them is the big issue. And with stroke, you're going to have damage to the communication all the way down there as well. But it means that we can apply electrical stimulation to that part of the spinal cord and try to boost maybe the weak signals that are coming down. And this has been shown by several groups, and I'm just showing a video from one of the really big key papers that made a splash. There was 3 that were published in 2018, all coordinated in one day. And this is someone who had a complete spinal cord injury, so they were wheelchair bound previously, chronically, so this is years after injury, and they are up and they are walking with a walker. And although this walking doesn't look, I would say, what a lot of people might call normal or what we can do without any assistance, it's pretty incredible that they are making those movements at all, and they're doing it out of their own volition. They don't have someone moving their legs for them. And so this is usually paired with rehab, which is really important. But it's something that has a lot of excitement and is in clinical trials right now, and pretty advanced clinical trials. There was special funding to try to get this into very large-scale clinical trials rather than the case studies that we have previously, so that hopefully this can be FDA approved. The devices that they're using are actually used for pain as standard of care and spasticity for off-label use. And so it's not too big of a stretch to have these same devices used for a new purpose. And so I think this is really exciting, but there's obviously a lot of work in this field to do to make this even more impactful. And then another way that we can supplement rehabilitation is through the use of robotic assistance. So the ones that we'll focus on a little bit today is exoskeletons or powered orthoses. So these are devices that are external to the body. They will have different attachment points along the limbs, and they will provide mechanical assistance to those movements using motors. The devices that are available now, I mean, they're so expensive that you don't really see people walking around in exoskeletons down the street like you would a walker or a wheelchair, but they are available, but they're, I think, mostly confined to research just to try to make them better. But the typical control strategy that drives these is a tilt sensor where they might lean forward a little bit, and that will trigger a step being taken forward, and that is an open loop step, so it's a predefined step that is taken. So it's not really the person driving their own limb, it's the exoskeleton moving their limb for them. And they have to kind of learn to go with that. And then more for the in-rehab side of things, there's something called the Locomat. This is a split-belt treadmill robot harness system. You can notice it's quite bulky. This is something that doesn't move around with you. This was a way to try to avoid having all those physical therapists moving the limbs for people as they're doing their treadmill training. And the early versions of this is a really interesting set of work. The early versions of this actually did not do very well. People actually got worse. And it was a really important lesson that we learned here, and that is that people need to be thinking about moving their limbs in order to have the rehab actually help them. So if you have them passively in this device and the robot's just moving their legs for them, I mean, theoretically, you could just fall asleep and your legs are moving. That actually won't help you. So you do have to put that mental effort because you're trying to boost and strengthen all those signals coming down from the brain down to the muscles. And so that was a really important lesson in our field, I would say. And yeah, I mean, I think we can all appreciate as well with the different types of spinal cord injury and stroke, people are going to have different extents of their injury. So there's a lot of variability in what muscles are weak or strong or fully paralyzed. Sensory function, motor function, it can differ very widely. With stroke, hemiplegia is a little bit more common, but again, the level of paralysis can be very different person to person. And so this is something that we like to keep in mind in our research and to kind of avoid those one-size-fits-all solutions is kind of the big thing here. So there is a really big need for personalized therapies that can augment any residual function someone has instead of trying to dictate movements or try to overpower what someone already has and maybe make that weaker. And then something else that we really like to touch on in the lab, and you'll kind of see throughout the research that we're doing, we really want to help people walk around in their community. So in PT and in the lab, we're typically doing things over a flat, overground surface, kind of perfect scenario for walking. It's really good to have a controlled environment so you can study things very consistently. I like to make things messy. And so, I mean, people, if they're walking in their community, even walking here, there were stairs, there's carpet, maybe there's a little bit of gravel on the road somewhere, there's curbs. There's all sorts of things that people encounter. Sometimes you have to walk on grass because a sidewalk's closed for construction or something. And so we have to be able to accommodate this type of variation in our environment if we want people to walk around safely in their communities. And so when they have different types of muscle weakness, it can make walking over these different terrains quite difficult, and it might be something that they even avoid going out because of the difficulties that they will face. And they have a lot of reduced confidence, so there's a lot of psychological and social aspects of not being able to walk around easily in your community or being scared to walk across the street, even things like that. And so as we're trying to think about solutions for personalized rehabilitation, with the technologies that we're using, it really comes down to customized parameters that fit the injury as well as, we'll get into the terrain. And so this is, a big transition from open loop to closed loop, but I don't even think what we think of as normal closed loop control strategies is a solution here, but having some way to customize those parameters for electrical stimulation or for an exoskeleton. But if kind of even what we do right now in the lab, there's a huge burden of tuning those parameters, and we'll kind of go into those specifically throughout the talk. But if you have to figure out what joint trajectories they're moving with or what electrodes are stimulating at what amplitude, there's a bunch of different decisions you have to make if you want to make it personalized, and that takes expert knowledge and time. And then there's also a lack of, I think, real-world scenario walking environments in the labs. So we like to move away from that perfect flat overground walking into something that's a little bit more challenging. And so what we think is what we kind of need to do moving forward is have a way to automatically tune these different parameters, control walking for different types of surfaces, and account for differences in their residual function after their injury, as well as potentially account for changes over time, because hopefully if we are helping people walk better and more often, they're gonna improve over time, and maybe you would require less assistance later from when they maybe started using a therapy. And so we really think that reinforcement learning is gonna be pivotal in achieving this customization. But we also have some other areas of machine learning that we think are appropriate as well. So we'll kind of go through a bunch of different specific scenarios and kind of the solutions we're looking at. But I feel like talking about the advantages of reinforcement learning in this audience, I think everybody just thinks it's the bomb, because it is. But for those of you who don't use it so much or aren't as familiar with it, it works really well in stochastic environments, and a lot of the signals we can record of movement, and as well as out in the community, you're going to have noise everywhere. You're going to have things changing. It's capable of online learning. We can learn through interaction with the environment, so it's continual learning along with that online learning. And then we have some, what we'll get into, temporal difference learning. These are methods that can use previously obtained estimates to make future estimates, which is a concept called bootstrapping. So it's a way of making confident predictions and then making even more predictions on those predictions and really extrapolating how we can think of what's about to happen and make decisions on control strategies accordingly. Now, I am excited that we're in Edmonton because I feel like this is the area that people know what we're talking about, and anywhere else I present about RL and I say we're not doing anything with reward, they get so confused and they try to tell me we're not doing RL, and then I get to educate them on this fun area that kind of came out of here. But reinforcement learning at its core, accumulated reward and then tried to estimate that future cumulative reward, and that was a way to guide decision making and achieve a goal. And that's really, I think, the basis of the field. It's learning something called a value function, and you try to determine how much value being in this current state holds and accumulate that and make the best decisions according to that value. But we can use similar methods, or kind of adapt those same methods to then not just learn or estimate future reward, but we can estimate and learn any kind of signal. And so this is called a general value function, or GVF, and this is kind of the world that we live in. So we want to use these methods to predict future values of any kind of signal that we're interested in. And I think this is one of the most powerful things that RL is giving us right now, especially in this field. And so kind of hitting on some of the research questions that we'll go through today, kind of pulling all of that together. We want to look at how people adapt their gait when they're transitioning between different terrains. So if we're looking at providing that customized assistance, we want to know, how do people normally do that in the first place? Because we found a huge gap in this literature, and so that's a bit of an area of study. We want to look at if we can find differences in how people walk on different terrains. Can we predict that or classify that? Is there a way that we can actually say confidently from a bunch of signals, this is the terrain we're on, or this is the terrain we're about to be on? We'll talk in a little bit about sensors and how we measure this, but we put a bunch of sensors on the body, and we want to minimize that because, as you can imagine, having to put on a bunch of sensors every day to get your then assistive device up and running, you want to minimize how much you're putting on and how much it interrupts with your clothing and your way of life, and you don't want them falling off and whatnot. So we're trying to really reduce that state space, which I think is an opposite problem of what some people are doing, where they're trying to expand their state space. So we're kind of going towards the minimum informative types of sensors, and then trying to see if we can then predict in real time these transitions in terrain. And all of this is just trying to get to our kind of overall goal of can we have enough knowledge of gait biomechanics and predictions of these different, especially the key sensor signals, so determine what those key sensor signals are so that we can then provide that personalized assistance with either an exoskeleton or spinal cord stimulation so that we can provide that customized control over different types of terrain. So that on the right is kind of where we're heading, and then I'll kind of go over what we have so far and what we have in the works for kind of the information that we need to learn and the methods we need to develop in order to get to that ultimate goal there. And so what we're doing in the lab is we're trying to mimic that kind of community type walking. So we have different terrains that we can have in the lab. So that can be with stairs, turns, ramps. And then we also have this uneven surface, which we have a cartoon of now because we'll see later it's covered in carpet. So there's these randomly spaced and randomly sized triangular prisms over pieces of hardwood or plywood covered in carpet, so you can't really see it, and it's a very destabilizing surface for people who have sensory impairment especially. And so we have all these different types of terrains in the lab that we can have people walk on, and this is pretty much where most of our data has come from. And in terms of the body-worn sensors that we have on people, so we can record wireless electromyography, which gives you the muscle activity and also maybe the intention to move, so you can see how much those muscles are firing and when. We also have wireless goniometers on the legs, so these will measure joint angles, and we have them for knee, ankle, and hip, and so we can look at the full excursion and range of motion of those joints over the walking cycle. And then we also have underfoot pressure with these wireless pressure insoles. So this gives us weight distribution from heel to toe, and the ones we have a lot of channels in there. There's a couple hundred. So we can get that quite finely tuned, and we can look at how that distribution is changing over time. And then kind of as a bonus signal, all of these sensors that we have a inertial measurement unit inside them, so we can get acceleration and angular velocity. So we are starting out with a lot of sensor signals and a lot of information, and this is actually a lot to put on the legs. This isn't even our full gamut of all of our sensors, so it's just showing a few of the different muscle placements for our electromyography, as well as one of the goniometers, but we can have 2 more on each leg. And then the underfoot pressure is pretty easy. It can slip inside their shoes, but we're looking for, or we're going to work with someone to maybe get ones that we can have in smaller shoes, because everything is built for men, we'll say. But we can record a lot about limb movement from these wireless sensors, and so it gives us a lot of information about what the legs are doing. And this is going to be really helpful for controlling these devices. And then what we did in the lab is we've set up a track, and we have 4 different iterations of basically putting out these different types of terrains in different order, and we have people walk over and over again over these types of terrain. And so the carpet there, that is the uneven surface underneath there, and then you can see the ramp and stairs. We also take them outside our gate lab and into just the general hospital, so we have larger sets of stairs, and we also go into the parkade, which they call a parking garage down there because they're weird. And they go in there, and we have a long ramp that we can use as long as we're just dodging cars down there. We have reflective vests that keep us safe, though. But yeah, so we have people walking all over these different terrains, and we can then understand a little bit about what's going on. So how are people adapting their gait when they're on different terrains and when they're transitioning between them? And so there's a little bit of work in this area that is really just isolated to stairs. So there's some work looking at how people will adjust their gait in the couple of steps just before they make a transition to a new type of terrain. And they can see, changes in muscle activation and joint angles. But it's, all we have found so far is just one paper on this kind of one type of terrain transition. And so there's a really big gap in literature. And since we're using so many terrains because we use so much of everything, and we have way more sensors than they ever recorded from, we can get a lot more biomechanical data on what people are doing when they approach new terrains. And so our student Grange Simpson is leading this work, and I just wanted to show a couple of key examples of kind of what we mean by people have these sensors can record very different signals based on what terrain they're on. And so this is the vastus lateralis muscle. It's one of your big quadricep muscles, and that's its activation on even ground, so flat even ground versus upstairs. So you can see that it's activating a lot more when people walk upstairs. That makes sense because you're going to have to work against gravity to make that elevation for each of those steps. So that's going to require big, strong knee extension. But if we look at all of our terrains that we have, even there, the upstairs, you can see that really big firing in that purple on the side, but even downstairs has a very different activation pattern over time throughout that gait cycle than the other terrains. And we, this is only one muscle. We have a whole bunch of muscles that we record from, and kind of putting that together, we can visually see that there's differences, and we'll move towards finding more automated ways to find these differences. But just to kind of give you an example to appreciate just how much our gait can change on these terrains, and then also looking at how we do that in between those changes. And then I just wanted to show a little bit of underfoot pressure. So these are from the insoles as someone's walking first on even ground on the left and stairs on the right. And that blue dot is their center of pressure moving as they go from heel strike to toe off. And you'll notice from the stairs there, they're not at the start of the gait cycle, they're more starting in the middle and going to the top, whereas even ground will go down and up. And that's because when people are on stairs, oftentimes they won't even heel place, they'll just kind of go on their toes and walk up. This is for able-bodied participants. It is likely different for people with different neurological impairments, but just something that we are finding that is unique to this terrain as well. And just want to point out, hopefully everyone can appreciate our students' little graphic of Patrick on the slides there. We had to mimic the goatee there. But if we look at, again, that center of pressure for all these different terrains, you can kind of look at how that ball is tracking throughout the gait cycle, and there's all these different traces, and you can see pretty stark differences between each of these terrains, and there's some that really stand out. That purple one is crazy. It's very different from that red and the green and the orange. But something that's interesting is if you actually overlay that on the foot, it's quite a little skinny placement. So we're working on some other ways of just characterizing the data that we get from that underfoot pressure to see if we can do some more differentiation. But this also might be informative enough to actually inform decision making. So it's been really interesting kind of seeing through various sensor signals all these differences in how people walk across different terrains and hopefully fill that gap in the field too. So I'll also say I'm going to do some like quick snippets of everything that we're doing, and everything is in progress here. But kind of knowing that we can visually see differences in these signals between these different types of terrains, can we then maybe put these into a classifier, something simple, and just see if a model can actually spot these differences as well. And so our student, Wyatt Young, who's here, for his undergrad research, he took these signals from these sensors and featurized them. So, we have these temporal, I guess, per gait cycle aspects of these signals, but we can pull in maximum amplitude, average amplitude, area under the curve. We can get frequency components, spectral components, time, amplitude, any kind of features. There's a lot of literature on what features you can pull, and we can get that from all of the muscles, the IMU, the goniometers, and the underfoot pressure. So take your pick. We have hundreds of features that we can put into these models. And so we're looking at using a support vector machine classifier to then use these signals and these features of these signals to classify which terrain that person is in. And Wyatt took the approach of doing a one versus all classifier and then having 7 of them in order to do those terrain classifications. And with our kind of preliminary data so far, it's definitely above 80% for everything, some of them hitting 95%, so pretty good for classification accuracy. We have some ways of improving this. I always like to say with walking, like even a 1% failure is you take 100 steps and you fall for one of them, that's pretty catastrophic, right? And so we are really trying to get to perfect in the lab, which is really challenging. This might not be the approach, but I think it was something that was really interesting to just see if we can have a model do what we do in our brains in terms of just looking at those signals and their features and separating them. So yeah, we're doing some refining of our feature space in order to improve that accuracy. And so part of that refining of that feature space is kind of what I alluded to before, where we're trying to figure out which sensors are the most informative. So kind of as I said when I introduced this, we really have a sensor overload, right? And there's a lot of features coming from each of these sensors. There's so much information from each one of them. Can we reduce it to 1 or 2? That would be amazing, I think, in my mind. So Wyatt, again, was trying to kind of look at separability of these different features and trying to find out which ones are most important. And we're playing around with this SHAP or shape. If anyone knows this method and has heard it out loud before, please tell us which one it is. We are debating in the lab if it's SHAP or shape. Yeah, Rich is laughing. You'll tell me later. So it's a method to help explain the features and their importance in with nonlinear data, right? So kind of opposed to PCA, which would be for more linear data, and trying to see which sensors are more important, or can we cut sensors and still achieve really high accuracy. And so just some preliminary work with this method. I mean, we started with 204 features, cut it almost in half, still getting about the same accuracy, some weird dips in the middle. A lot of work to still be done here, but I think some really interesting results, and obviously a lot more feature reduction to happen as we get more data to put into these models and kind of refine our feature space here. So this is just a little bit of a body of work that we are starting here, and hopefully through these methods or other methods, if we have other ideas in the room, maybe reducing a lot of those redundant features so that we can really minimize that burden on people. And then speaking of sensor burden, I wanted to highlight some work done by some of our lab members that couldn't come up with us this week. There's also information that we get from sensor signals that might inform other sensor signals. And what I mean by that is, for example, our inertial measurement unit from each of these sensors. We have XYZ components of the acceleration from these sensor signals, and you look at this and I don't know about you, like there's some little repeating pieces, I think especially in that light blue pops out to me, but it's like a fairly variable noisy signal. At least for me, I don't think I would intuitively look at that and be like, oh yeah, they're in swing phase, they're in stance phase. But what Kylie and Chris has done, which is really cool, is they actually took this IMU data, and then they put it through a model, which I'll get into in a minute, and they're looking to see if we can predict or recreate underfoot pressure from just this one IMU signal. And so what they did is they employed a long short-term memory architecture. So this is a type of recurrent neural network, and they did a bidirectional LSTM and appended a multi-layer perceptron. Someone told me they're dead now and they're useless, but I don't know, we're bringing them back. And then in the end, putting those IMU signals in and hopefully getting that underfoot pressure out. And again, this is pretty preliminary work, and what we found so far is actually it does really well. And so that purple there is that true underfoot pressure signal, and the LSTM as well as an LSTM with an attention feature are both able to actually predict their preceding that true underfoot pressure, and at least in that little visual snippet, quite similarly. But if we actually quantify the root mean squared error, fairly low error, and actually similar performance or even worse performance with the LSTM plus attention. And so this was cool because adding the attention adds a lot more computational complexity and computation time, so actually simpler is better. And I love when that happens too. That's why MLPs can't die. Sometimes we need simpler. And we also kind of found, not much difference between where we place those IMUs. And so they took the signals that were on the EMG sensors all over the muscles. They just took the IMU data, and it didn't matter if it was proximal or distal on the leg, on the front or the back. They're all able to recreate that underfoot pressure signal pretty well. So we're going to explore this a little bit more, and again, maybe we can make some of these sensors redundant with each other because we can recreate other signals with other signals, which is kind of wild and a really cool concept. And then kind of towards the end here, kind of putting a lot of things together. So we're trying to learn about gait and different terrains. We're recording it with a bunch of sensors. We're trying to see if these sensors can tell us about terrains. We're trying to reduce sensors. And then kind of the last piece is then can we use this sensor information to then make predictions about terrain in real time. And this is kind of where we'll get into some of the RL piece. And kind of as I said before, we're going to use reinforcement learning to predict these different wearable sensor signals in the form of the general value function. So much temporal difference learning, so little time. I was trying to make a time pun too. I was quite proud of that. This was late last night. But kind of what we came into is, especially when my student Sunny started the lab, I had used, I think a lot of people are quite familiar with temporal difference learning and TD lambda, kind of created by Rich here. For my PhD and some of Patrick's work as well, using true online temporal difference learning, that was a method that came about in the mid-2010s. So that was a method that worked really well for some of our prior work. But Patrick said, hey, there's also this new method that was like brand new at the time called SwiftTD. And maybe this will be better for our online learning and might be able to produce more accurate predictions of these signals. And so what Sunny did is like, okay, let's just compare them. Right? It's kind of simple goal here. And so what we sought to do is test each of these methods in their ability to predict these sensor signals, and then as people are walking over those different terrains. And so as we're making those comparisons, we have those, I'm going to call them the actual sensor signals or the real signals from those sensors. We have our prediction algorithm, which will be either TD lambda, TOTD, the true online temporal difference learning, or SwiftTD. Going into that, for our feature representation, we used selective Canova coding, which is also came out of Patrick's lab. It's like Canova coding, but with equal size vectors, so it doesn't blow up. And if you want to talk more about that, we can later. It's a really cool method. And then using each of those methods to generate those kind of predictions of those sensor signals. And then using those and then comparing how well they are actually making those predictions compared to what we know as a ground truth. And so just, again, some preliminary data that we published in iCore this year. This is muscle activity from a tibialis anterior muscle. That's the front of your shin, pulls your toes up when you're walking so you don't trip on your toes. Really important muscle for stroke, especially. And this in the black is our expected return for this signal. So this is what we can calculate offline as this should be our future discounted sum of the tibialis anterior muscle activity. So that same RL concept for reward and return, but applied to this other signal instead. And I just kind of want to highlight kind of two parts of this. So we have different aspects of these signals, and I just want to highlight in the black the expected return. We have it increasing, decreasing before that tibialis anterior activity is increasing and decreasing. So you do want it to be predicting, not overlapping with that true signal, something that is very important. So we can kind of see that preceding the rise of that signal before the actual rise in that signal. And this helps with making anticipatory decisions before you encounter a terrain or before you need to make a limb movement. It also helps just account for any computation time in between there. And similarly, we have a fall in both signals, and with our expected return that is preceding the actual signal. And so with TD lambda, our kind of baseline method here, this is the return that it produces from the tibialis anterior signal. So you can see it, I think it's pretty good. It's a little bit wiggly, but it's really good. And our true online temporal difference learning just covered it up. So it did almost exactly. And then our SwiftTD is, it has the same general structure, but it's a little bit, looks almost noisy, right? So that was kind of interesting. And then the TD lambda and true online temporal difference, they were not significant. There's like the slightest parts where they don't overlap completely. So moving forward, we just focused on true online temporal difference learning because we knew that worked online well in our prior work, and comparing things to SwiftTD. What we found in kind of a nutshell is that true online temporal difference learning achieves lower error, especially when you're looking further into the future. So I'm omitting a lot of information here, but we tested this across a lot of gamma values, which is a way for us to look at different time points in the future and how far in advance do we want to make decisions. And essentially, the further out we're looking, the less error we have with true online temporal difference learning when compared to SwiftTD. And this final value here, where we do have a difference that's looking ahead 2 seconds, which actually would be like 2 full gait cycles, which is pretty cool. But SwiftTD, even though it has that kind of crazy structure to it, over time it does actually converge faster than true online temporal difference learning. And so we saw that kind of across all of our gamma values or across all these different time scales. We have a lot more work to kind of tease this apart a little bit, but a little bit interesting. So it seems like there's maybe a little bit of a trade-off with convergence time and accuracy, but overall, I think that the methods, I don't know if there's a true winner. I think we're going to just move forward with TOTD because it's not so noisy and it's less computationally complex. SwiftTD has a lot of variables that we kind of just left alone and probably could have been tuned better for this work. But I think as a conference paper, this was a really interesting question to pose. But then, okay, predictions. What are they good for? Right? So yeah, this is going to be the paper title, we have decided. But honestly, like, okay, we have predictions. I think we can kind of appreciate that knowing if something's about to happen, it helps us make decisions about what we should do, and that goes beyond walking, right? So some people like to make informed decisions. I'm one of them. Some people don't. I don't know. But our body is using predictions of something all the time to make decisions, right? If I just like take my water bottle and I throw it at you, hopefully you're looking at me, and then you would have some kind of visual perception of this coming at your face, and you would be making a prediction of when it's going to arrive at you, and you can move your hand in the way to catch it, right? If you're not paying attention and your sensor signals aren't reading this water bottle coming at your face, then it will be a surprise and hit you. So again, motor actions as a result of predictions that you were sensing with your body. Same thing, right? So we have all these sensor signals that we're measuring from the legs, and we know that we can learn predictions of these sensor signals, which we had just shown. But can we use them maybe to predict the walking terrain? Again, trying to see if we can make those anticipatory decisions so that we can maybe change a control strategy ahead of that transition. And so we took a really cool approach thanks to Patrick's crazy ideas, which was a lot of fun, and essentially putting these predictions into different parts of a deep neural network. And so the first network that we have is just taking those actual sensor signals and putting them into the input layer of a network. So this is kind of what you would do if you didn't do RL, right? These are just the signals themselves going into a deep neural net, and it's going to produce a prediction of which terrain it's on, right? And so that's kind of our gold standard case. We have another one where it's just those predicted signals only, so the general value functions are now going into that input node of that deep learning network, and then same thing, we're trying to get the terrain out of it. We have one network that takes both those actual signals and the predictions into the input layer. So seeing if knowing what is now and what is about to be, if we have both of those pieces of information, is that better in terms of our decision making? And then here's the kind of wacky and fun one. What if we put our actual signals into the input space, but then we take those predictions and put them in the middle, in the latent space of those neural networks? I don't even know where this idea originated, but it was really cool, and we said, why not? Let's try it. And to be honest, this produced really cool results and kind of spun our research out in really cool directions. Because essentially, if you have predictions at the beginning, on their own, or in the middle, you will do better in terms of the accuracy than the raw signals alone. And so I think predictions, what are they good for? They're good for something. So yeah, this was a really interesting result. Again, a little bit preliminary at this point with some of our data. We've collected a lot more to put into these models now, but I think what it really told us and what we kind of came out clearly was that, yeah, predictions are useful. And now it's a question of, like, what are we doing with them and why? And so when we're talking about how we use predictions in learning, it kind of leads to a lot of questions. So, what signals are we being measured and which ones are worth predicting? We're trying to answer that in other areas of our research. Are the predictions even being used for decision making? I think we can kind of say probably at this point, because we do have improved accuracy when we use those predictions in those models. But then I think we still have a little bit more to answer in terms of where should these predictions be incorporated into a learning system, and then if it is like something in the latent space, why? Why is it performing better there? Or why would it be useful in that latent space layer? So it's kind of a little fun little area of research that we're starting to grow now, and kind of going into the more fundamentals. But I just kind of wanted to bring it back as we get near the end here, kind of all these research questions that I proposed and kind of gave you some idea of what we're working on so far in terms of understanding changes in terrains and how the people adapt their gait, which sensors we can use to record that, and then can we use that to predict that, using a few different methods. And again, getting all that knowledge towards an assistive technology so that we can get that personalized assist as needed control of walking over those different terrains. And so, because we don't have a lot of data and we're in the early phases of this, but are always open to chat for ideas, I just wanted to put it out there of other things that need to be controlled that we're starting to work on now. One of them is which electrodes are we selecting when we're stimulating? And I have one more slide for each of these. Another is our stimulation parameters. So there's a bunch of parameters that we can set for electrical stimulation. How do we pick them? And how do we do that automatically so it's not just us kind of turning all the dials all the time? And then when do we deliver stimulation so that we can activate muscles at the right time so that we can get walking that is safe and efficacious? And so I'm going to kind of start backwards a little bit on the timing of stimulation. We did a lot of work previously during my PhD on Pavlovian control, inspired by a lot of Joseph Modale's work with Rich, and using general value functions to initiate the transitions between different phases of the gait cycle. So breaking up stance and swing into 2 phases each. So we kind of had 4 phases, and we can use different sensor signals to trigger stimulation in between them. And we did it using those general value functions, so using predictions, and showed that it is more stable than if you don't have predictions. We are already tackling a little bit of the transitions between the different terrains, so that's kind of, I think, another aspect of delivering timing. But we're trying to move a bit more away from that state control or that discrete terrain, discrete phase of gait idea, and more into something more continual, which I think is a good dream to have, but in actuation and in implementation is quite challenging. So I think it's going to be a really fun problem to tackle. In terms of electrical stimulation and selecting those electrodes, so we have electrodes over the spinal cord. We have each array typically has 8 to 16 electrodes. Some even have 32. And we have 1 or 2 implanted in people. And we have to know which electrode produces what muscle activation. And if it's an implant that they can move a little bit, posture changes them a little bit. So we need to kind of have that map of this electrode number activates this muscle, this electrode number activates this muscle. And when we do it in the lab, even for the rehab setup for all those studies, you literally stimulate, observe, stimulate, observe. And you have to remap that every day, and you have to make sure it's consistent. And it is so time-consuming, it's burdensome for experts, for the participants, for their caregivers. I would love to develop an automated method of doing this, and we were kind of toying with RL for this, but it might just be a little bit simpler than that as well. But this is something that we would love to chat with if people have some ideas. This is new work that's being led by 2 of our students here today. And then in terms of the stimulation parameters, I said there's a lot we can tune. We're going to try to focus on 1 or 2. The big one is amplitude, so more amplitude, bigger contractions. Frequency can also contribute to the strength of the contraction. And maybe we are characterizing these sort of right now as strong, medium, weak, or no contractions, but essentially making sure that we can augment the function accordingly. So maybe they can produce a weak contraction, but we need a strong one. And so being able to kind of characterize this, and I think maybe we will finally venture into reward-based RL to maybe accomplish this one. But this is, again, another area that we're trying to explore so that we can do that, provide assistance as needed. And then kind of putting this all together, I think as a body of work and kind of where we're headed, is really just trying to have personalized solutions for kind of all of these factors with stimulation or even with an exoskeleton and controlling those leg movements so that we can have people just walking around in their community anywhere in a way that they're confident and, will just benefit a lot from these technologies and see them really get into people. So with that, I'll finish here. I actually have no idea what time we're at because I don't think I reset my timer on here. And I didn't look at my watch, but I just wanted to thank my awesome lab. A few of them are here, but here's kind of one of our more recent lab photos with our lab logo on a van because They convinced me to buy a 3-foot wide magnet to put on a van to a road trip to Colorado for a conference, and this was the Nerves Mobile. And it was pretty awesome, and we all had our matching swag out in the mountains. But Patrick has been an amazing colleague and collaborator on this work, and I know my students have loved working with him through all of this. We have a little bit of funding from pilot grants and a fellowship for Sunny, and the rest has been on startup because yay, U.S. funding culture. But yeah, I think we'll stop for questions, and then I also have my email and our lab website if you wanted to look anything up or ask things later offline as well.